Alright, this is our last video in this week's tutorials. This one's a little riskier. I'm going straight in from the last one. I thought maybe I would prep before, but you know what? I think I've got this, so let's see how it goes. So last we left, if you want to double check here, I hit play. I have this T-pose character mannequin. I can control my pivot, looking around, movement forward and backwards. Just because I'm terrified of it running off the cliff. I'm going to change this floor to the scale to be a little bit bigger. 20, 20. There we go. That much less likely to fall off the cliff now. But this is not what we want. What we want is a living, breathing character, so to speak, with walking and running and standing still and emotions. And that's the last piece of the puzzle, if you will. And just for clarity's sake, I'm going to move this spring arm back even further. I want to see the full scope. I was in the character blueprint there. There, I want to see the whole character there. Closing the project settings. So going back here, I kind of briefly showed you this in another one. If I go to my mesh right here, I'm looking at the details. Under animation, there's something called animation blueprint or use animation asset. So I could choose a walk animation. And this is what I meant by the in place when you downloaded it. See how we're moving the capsule component with the input, but the capsule component is carrying the mesh as a child. So that's why we want it to be moving in place. So if I hit play there. Now when I move forward, it looks correct, but if I stop moving, obviously it starts to break a little bit. So the issue is that we have all the pieces of the puzzle we need here. We have the idle, the walk, the run, these other things, but this animation asset player back in the character blueprint isn't going to cut it. We need something that can be like a little bit more smarter. We want some logic to when certain animations play. And we're also going to learn that we can blend those animations together, so it's not like a herky-jerky transition. And it's kind of suggested how we do this in this options right here for the mode. And that is with something called an animation blueprint. And following the logic of a blueprint being a place to code aspects of Unreal Engine and create interactivity, events and whatnot, by that logic, an animation blueprint is a place where we can code interactivity and logic specific to animations. So I'm going to come back to my mannequin. I'm going to choose the skeletal mesh, right click, go to create, and I'm going to choose animation blueprint using the selected skeleton. And I'm going to call this ABP mannequin, as in animation blueprint. I'm going to drag that into my animation folder just to organize. And double click it. And what we get is something both brand new and similar to what we've already worked with. Up at the top here, you should see Anim graph and event graph. If you don't, you can double click on event graph or Anim graph down in the bottom left corner here. And let's look at our event graph first. This is remarkably similar to our event graph in any blueprint. There is a event. This is basically our event tick kind of event window here. Every time the animation or the frame updates, this will come out here. And then we have something new called an animation graph with an output pose. And essentially what we're seeing here is whatever goes into here will be our final output that'll translate to the skeleton. And this is kind of a preview window to see how all this works. So if I right click here, I could choose one of play animation, and it actually brings up some of the animations I already made. So I could do clap. And I'll do compile. Now you see that I have the clapping animation. And if I go back to my blueprint character, or character blueprint, I could choose Anim class ABP mannequin, compile. This doesn't solve any of the problems we just had. I'm still only working with the clapping animation because that's all we've coded in. But you can see, like, now all we have to do is do some kind of like flow control of like what's going to happen here. And the first place I want to work from, I'm going to get rid of this and compile, is I want to work with something called a blend space. So we have to go back to our animation folder, and I am going to go to right-click, animation, blend space. I believe it's 1D. If I get it wrong, I'm going to make it right now. We'll see what happens. I might have gotten this incorrect. And I'm going to choose our mannequin skeleton. And I'm going to call this BS for blend space. Idle, walk, run. That is not what I was expecting, so we'll say send and restart. This happens. I hope, if anything, you take this to know that even for those of us that know what we're doing, Unreal Engine just crashes sometimes. Hopefully, it is not too far behind from where I left it. There's usually a pretty good autosave. I can double check by going to animation, and it looks like we're in good shape. Everything's still saved. My animation blueprint and blend space is still here. Hopefully it doesn't cause it to crash when I open it this time. There we go. So just to recover where we were, I have my animation blueprint. I'll have that open as well. And I have my character blueprint. I'll just organize them. So we have our character blueprint, our animation blueprint, and then what I just made, the blend space 1D idle walk run file. What this is going to let us do is we're going to use this as an axis in which to choose different animations and blend between them. And I can do that, I believe, by coming over here to my asset browser, and I'm going to choose animation idle. And I'm going to drag that into this kind of, we can't really tell what it is yet, but it's basically a one-axis mapping. I'll drag it to the far left. And now you see that I have my animation idle right here. Then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to grab my animation run. And you can see that there's like 5 places I can put it. I'm going to put it all the way over on the far right. And what we have now, this green cursor, is a blend space between these two opposite axes. On the far left, we have animation idle, and over on the far right, we have animation run. And what this lets us do is build like a, what if I had 80% run and 20% idle? So you can see where we're going with this maybe. Like, we are going to blend between idle, walk, and run. And by changing that value based on whether the character is moving or not, we can simulate a kind of fluid walk cycle for this character. So the last one I'm going to grab is animation walk. And it actually works out pretty simply, like, and these are different percentages, like if, you know, between 0 and 25 is a full idle to walk. And then it's actually remarkably fluid, moving all the way over to run. Now it looks almost like a speed walk, a jog, a full-on jog, and here we are to running. And I believe the one thing we're missing is, did I make a mistake in not prepping this ahead of time? No. We need to name this value. So right now this value goes between 0 and 100, it looks like. And I want to be able to, in the code of my animation blueprint, I want to be able to target this value and change it on the fly. And I believe I can do that by coming over here to axis settings, horizontal axis, and I'll say speed. And when I hit enter, this down here we should be able to see that. I just realized because this reset, everything, all this stuff is probably too small for you to see. So I'm going to go to, let's see, Window, Developer Tools, Widget Reflector, and change the application scale to 1.7. There we go. Apologies for that. I know it's hard to see these on YouTube. But all that's to say, now we have something called speed with an axis between 0 and 100 that controls blending between these values. So I'm going to hit save and go back to my animation blueprint. And now I believe I can just type in blend space player. And it has that the one we made. And you can see that if I say compile, we're in idle, and there's actually an input called speed that we can affect. I'm going to drag off of it, and I'm going to say promote to variable, and I'll call that. It auto names it to speed. And if I hit compile, I can change the value of this. So if I say 100, it's running. If I say 25, it's walking. 60 is a light jog, speed walk. 0 is idle. So what I need to do is find something to control this speed variable. I'm going to come back to event graph. And what I want to do is find the velocity of our pawn. The velocity being like how fast it's moving, essentially. And we know that our character is moving when we do our our controller inputs. It's either standing still or it's moving forward at a certain velocity. So I'm going to say try get pawn owner. This is just a way to reference the pawn that we're controlling. I can drag off of it and say get forward get velocity. There we go. I don't need a forward velocity. And what we want to do, if I remember correctly, is I think this is like right now, this is a vector. We want to turn it into a single value. I'm going to check my notes on how we go about doing that here. Just bear with me to make sure I get this right. Yes. All we have to use is some math with this thing called vector length. Again, I don't know the math of it super well. I've encountered it before. But we can use this as essentially what our speed is. So I can say drag off of this on our variable and say set speed. And then update that every frame. Let's see what happens. And my character has completely disappeared. I'm wondering, oh, here it is. When the game reset, the game mode was taken away. So I'll go back to my game. Oh, I guess that's the one thing that didn't save. We can fix that. Create new blueprint. We're in the world settings. My game mode. Utilities. Selected game mode. Default pawn class, BP character. And let's just do save all. Hopefully we won't encounter that weirdness again. Oh, I forgot the last thing. Our animation blueprint for our BP character. Use animation blueprint ABP mannequin. So we're using the animation blueprint that we just made. You can see I'm looking around, and then when I move forward, it's running. And it's a bit, like it's kind of an on-off switch of moving forward or not, so like it doesn't blend perfectly, but it's a little better than we would hope. And again, I think I lost that when everything restarted. I'll go back to my spring arm. I just want to be able to see things well. 250. And there we have it. We have a character that's running forward and it stops. And I believe you can control the speed of the character under your character movement. Max walk speed. So maybe if we change that to 100. It is much slower. And what we could do is in our animation blueprint, we could scale this. Or actually the fastest way might be able to just change our maximum axis value to 10. No, 600. And we just need to kind of play with the value. I'm sure there's some math. I'm kind of just like winging it to try and get the slow walking speed to match with. There we go. Now we have now we're not in a rush anywhere. We can like slowly walk around and whatnot. We could probably even build a different button that's the run button where it changes the max walking speed. That's the kind of logic we can start to think about building out. So yeah, that's basically how we hook up a blend space player to the velocity of our character moving forward and how we utilize all these things. And I want to work with one more thing. I'm going to hit exit. We still have these animations. Where are we? I can go to here and say, there we go. We have cry and clap. I want to hold down a button and trigger those animations. And that's going to take us to the last thing I want to cover, which is a state machine. So even though this blend space walk, and I should say actually you can do a 2-axis or 2-dimensional blend space, so you could actually have not only speed, but you could have whatever you want to call this variable, and you could have something up here, and you could create these very complex animations blending between all of them. But state machines, if I come back to my animation blueprint and go to the animation graph, what if I wanted some logic that was a little more complex than just this one-dimensional thing? We can say add state machine, and I'll just give it a name like character logic, and I'm going to control X and double click on this and control V. Actually, we can't even do that. Not that there's a problem with that. And if things disappeared, it's because we are nested right now. If I go back to animation graph, you can see that that's right there. And if I double click, I'm just kind of going inside the nest. If you want to be able to see both, you could always add your animation graph back here. And what we need is either conduits or states. A state is a location where something is happening, and a conduit is a rule for translating to a new state. So let's call this idle, walk, run. And my entry will go into that. So whenever anything starts, we'll start with that. And I can go into here. Again, I'm double clicking, I'm going even deeper down the rabbit hole. And I can put my blend space player in here. And again, I can grab my variable. Nothing's changed. We just are setting this as the initial behavior of our state machine. And we can just double check it. I'll hit compile. Oop, let's go back. Oh, I need to hook this up. Compile. and everything works. And then I'm going to come back to my state machine, double click, and I'm going to drag off and say add conduit. Oops, sorry, I was totally wrong. I completely all we're going to work with is add states. And let's call this state cry. And let's drag off and make another one and add this state applaud. And what I got confused about was I thought the conduits were essentially these, which is our transition rules. What we need to set is some kind of input rule for when it should move from what's happening in this state to this state, which we'll put our crying animation in. Let's go ahead and just set that up. I can just say animation cry. And I'll go back and applaud. I'll say animation clap. So we have our blend space player in here, and we want to transition to cry or applaud based on something happening. And let's do that with holding down a key on our keyboard. I know I showed you the access mappings and the event mappings, but we're just going to go to our event. I believe we're going to do the, how do we want to do this? I guess that's the way we can do it. We'll go to project settings, input, action mappings. And let's just call this cry. I think this is going to work. I could be totally wrong. There might be better ways to do this. I'll do character Z. And I'll do character applause. Character X. I already think this isn't the right way to do it, but this is a good thing just to try out. So I'm going to come back to my animation blueprint, go to my animation graph, go to my character logic. And the question is, we need something here like a Boolean when something's true or false that it can enter the transition. So I'm going to grab my input event cry, or can I just say cry? And this was my worry, that I don't think that these are visible in this part, in the project settings. What was it I called it? An action mapping. So what I actually need to do is go back to, here we go. Action mapping, this is the character blueprint. And I'll say action mapping cry. Actually, this is perfect. This is what we want. I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call can cry question mark. And this variable is a Boolean. And if I drag off, I can say set. I'm going to copy paste it. And when this is pressed, I'm going to say yes, this is true. And when I release it, it's not true. And I'm going to do the same thing for applaud. Can clap for another variable, and I'm doing some, I'm interchangeably using applaud, applause, or clap. If I were doing a better job at this tutorial, I'd be more consistent, would understand that I'm saying that this action in the state machine is called applause, but I'm using a variable and animation called clap, so understand that that's what's happening here. And when I let go of X, it turns that Boolean off. And the reason I set all this up is I want there to be another variable. Actually, not even a variable. I need to pass these to the animation blueprint. And this is something that gets kind of tricky, is like, where are variables visible? Right now my blueprint character is different than my animation blueprint. What's visible in one is not necessarily visible in the other. So I might have to cast to it. And the way to do that is, let me just double check here. Cast to. So is this going to work the way I think it is? I think it will. Casting, what it does is it basically is a way to refer to an existing character and receive information from that character, or class, I should say. So what I need to do is drag off of my subject, this is my pawn, and say cast to BP character. And once I do that, I can if that's true, if it works, I can say get I can cry. And I'm making that a variable here. And I am just going to check that this is working. I'm going to come back to my, just cleaning up here. I'm going to go back to my animation graph, my character logic, and go to my transition rule. And I'm going to say can cry get, and hit compile and save, and it's already giving me an error. I don't think this is going to work. I apologize, this is starting to get a little... Nope, that's not working. So I need to reconfigure how I'm doing this. Let's take a step back. I'm going to delete this. Go to my event graph. This is not the way I was supposed to do it. I know what I'm doing wrong. Rather than having my animation blueprint try and cast to my blueprint character, I'm going to try and cast to my animation blueprint from the blueprint character. So I have these variables can cry and can clap. I'm going to make them visible. And this is my animation blueprint. And I'm going to get rid of these. I still have my inputs. And I'm going to drag off my mesh here. And I'm going to say get anim instance. This is a way of getting the instance of my animation blueprint. And from here, I'm going to say cast to ABP mannequin. And from there I can reference my variable can cry. I'm going to copy paste that. And say set. So here's the logic. I apologize, I basically mixed these up and did it inversely. My blueprint character, my mesh, has an animation blueprint. And in that animation blueprint are two variables, can cry and it can clap. And in my state machine, the transition rule from moving to the idle walk run is that variable, can cry. If it's true, then it can make that transition. What I'm doing is from the blueprint character, I'm targeting that animation blueprint by casting to it so that when I use that input action of Z, I'm saying, okay, get this specific instance of the animation blueprint, and if what I gave you works, then reference the can_cry variable inside of it and set it to be true, and then set it to be false here. So I will now hit play and hold down Z. And now it's beginning my crying animation. The issue is now I need to exit out of that state. And it's kind of, we set it so that we can turn the variable off when we release the button. We just need to go back to our our state machine. And build a pathway back to idle walk run. And we can double click there. And I can say can_cry, get can_cry. And I can say not equal. Or not true. And I hit Z, I'm crying, and I let go, and it takes me back to the blend space player. Stop walking. I could even do this while I'm walking, start crying. Obviously the movement's not happening there, but there's ways around that. And then there's, just to wrap this all up, going back to my blueprint character, I'm going to do the same thing for clapping. Get can clap. Okay, set. Oop, this one. Save, go back to the animation blueprint, go back to my state machine, transition rule for going to can clap, grab this, get, yes, make a pathway back, which is the inverse when it's not true. Oop. Not Boolean. Go back, hit play. Now when I hit X, I'm applauding. When I hit Z, I'm crying. When I'm moving forward, I'm walking. And there you have it. And then just so I hand you the same character files you're used to, I'll go back to my character movement, change my max walk speed to 600 like it was, and change my maximum axis and my blend space to 100. There we go. So that's it. My applauding, running, crying character that I can pivot around in. That was a lot, obviously. I'm sorry I kind of pivoted to the wrong direction there. That'll teach me to just kind of go in cold like that. But the logic is there. I'll leave this all set up so that you can work off of these files. But this is kind of how you would build a video game character. Obviously, you could do things like you could build in other animations with different buttons and hotkeys, different logics. You could try and set up obstacles for the character to run around. There's some simple things you can kind of explore, and if this is a direction you want to go further in, I have other tutorials I can direct you to for more video game kind of logic stuff. But just use this as a way to start to get more comfortable with skeletal meshes, character blueprints, animation blueprints. I know it's a lot, but I'm confident you'll get there. I'll see you next week.